Welcome to Building Sustainability, the podcast that brings you interviews with designers, builders, makers, dreamers and doers, exploring the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hart. This is the second of the birthday/coronavirus triple bill. This episode is with Beth Williams. Beth is a structural engineer, certified PassivHaus designer. She's passionate about diversity in construction, timber engineering, and efficient, humble design. That's taken directly from her Twitter bio. And I think reading that bio was what really made me want to talk to Beth on this podcast. I think there's a lot in there that really interests me. Maybe some of you don't know exactly what a structural engineer does, and that's something we talk about in this podcast. But it's quite rare, I found, for a structural engineer to really be interested in timber and to have sustainability as something sort of high up in their priorities. So we start this conversation by talking about what exactly a structural engineer does, how they're involved in a project. There's often quite a lot of friction, maybe, between builders and structural engineers. And so it's really nice. This is a conversation between a builder and a structural engineer. And I think these conversations go a long way to actually helping us understand where the other is coming from, and so we can work better together. So I met Beth at one of the Green Register events, organised by Lucy, who featured in the last podcast. We had a really pleasing conversation where Beth told me that she wanted to train up to become a timber grader, meaning that she could inspect pieces of timber and say what sort of strength category they're in. I really enjoyed that idea of really getting hands-on. It feels like maybe a rarity in structural engineers. So I was instantly pleased to have met Beth. So within this podcast, we talk about how sustainability became part of her engineering. We talk about getting the best from your structural engineer. We talk a lot about the difficulties in specifying timber, and how every timber is different and can be grown and cut in different ways and therefore affects the calculations. We talk a little bit about diversity in construction, and we talk a little bit about her own home, the retrofit that she is undertaking, and the work that she's already done and what she hopes to do. So that's it from me for now. I will be back at the end. Enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, I get that a lot. A lot of people know what architects do. They know what builders do. They sometimes know what quantity surveyors do, but most of them don't know. That partly that structural engineers exist as a profession. So yeah, what I tend to say to people is that architects design the spaces and how the building looks, how it feels to be in, and then we make it stand up. So that's the sort of simplest explanation. I mean, because most people think that that's part of what the architect does, that they make the building stand up as well. And I'm like, no, that's a separate job now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I tell people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so if I was building my own home, what sort of interaction would I have with you about the construction?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on the sort of we do a range of projects from really tiny, just one beam knock through, people taking out a wall in their house, all the way up to sort of non-domestic student resi and all sorts of things. But so it depends how much interaction we have with the client depends on the size of the job, really. With small beam knock-throughs with no architect involved, we'll obviously be directly liaising with the client and the builder to sort of work out what they want it to look like. And with larger projects, we tend to be more involved via the architect. So we're generally working for the client sort of notionally. We work, most of our work is liaising with the architect, working out the details, working out how things are going to get built with the builder and with the architect. So it tends to split depending on the size of the job.
Okay, so with a larger project, it might be that the client might never even speak to you.
Yeah, which is quite strange, because when I first graduated, because my degree's in structural engineering and architecture, so when I first graduated, I worked with an architect's practice, and you're constantly involved with the client. You're asking them loads of questions on that side of things, and then to come to some jobs where we can have minimal contact with the client. It might just be that we get an email from them to say that we were appointed, and then we send them invoices, but there's nothing in between, which is difficult. And it's one of the things I struggle with a bit about what we do and how we're appointed sometimes. Yeah, that's how we tend to work.
I guess so. I've worked with quite a lot of structural engineers over the years, and there's been a real range in sort of sustainability thoughts. For some, it hasn't been the remotest possibility, and we've had to fight and really push them to come up with sort of more sustainable solutions. And then others, they've been a bit more giving, or sort of, it's been more of a focus for them. But you put sustainability sort of higher up your list of sort of offerings, don't you?
Yeah, it's an odd one. Sort of, I guess from the start, thinking about what we learned about sustainability at university, I think maybe we had a lecture course on sustainability, but when engineers tend to talk about sustainability, it's wider than just environmental sustainability. They tend to talk about it in sort of the whole economic and social sustainability as well. So it's when at university, our sustainability lecture course, 10 lectures, was that kind of broad spectrum of sustainability. It does depend on where you go to university. And then sort of thinking about materiality as well, we had one lecture on timber in 4 years at university.
Really?
We had one lecture on masonry. That's kind of usual. Then the rest was on steel and concrete. And that's still I tutor at Bath University, UE, and Cardiff, and it's all similar. The focus depends slightly, but that's the sort of usual engineer graduating nowadays. That's how much sort of sustainability they will have had, input and materials specific as well. So that's sort of where when I talk to people about this, I'm sort of trying to say that's where a lot of engineers are coming from. That is the level of experience of understanding that you are sort of standard getting. From my experience, I knew that I wanted to focus on sustainability before going to university. That was one of my focuses in coming into the industry. My dad was a builder, and he was a sustainable builder. He's doing that the whole of his working life, so I had an understanding. I'd spent most of my childhood hanging around on building sites waiting for him to finish work. So that was my experience of it. But I knew that I wanted to focus on that. And it was interesting sort of coming out of university, you always come out really starry-eyed thinking you're going to change the world, but a lot of people were telling me, oh, you'll struggle to get work in that, looking at sustainability, or we don't get much timber engineering, or it'll be really difficult to focus, really difficult to make a business case to do that kind of thing. And it was interesting, the negativity around that, not just from other engineers, but from people in the construction industry, well, wider than that. And it has been a concerted effort to focus on getting sustainability projects as like my main workload, and it's taken a little while to get there, but it actually sort of somehow ended up there now. But it's just sort of it isn't an easy thing, and it isn't something that just sort of drops into your lap. I think especially as a structural engineer or civil engineer, it did take a bit of concerted effort. So yeah, and the understanding in the sort of civil engineering world as a whole of particularly sort of super low energy type projects, low carbon type projects, is limited, and is quite a way behind. I think even behind things like the architecture profession, and perhaps some of the builders as well. I think sometimes we're still sort of struggling to catch up sometimes with how we approach sustainability. Mm-hmm. I've just done my chartership process as well, gone through that just before Christmas, and one of the core objectives for your chartership is sustainability. And I went to a little course run by the local institute branch about sustainability, and I sort of lost the plot a little bit with when the guy running the course started talking about the sustainability approach of why you would buy a Land Rover Defender over anything else, over an electric vehicle, and I was like, oh, okay, this is where we're coming from on this. So I was like, yeah. So, but that's sort of the level where engineering, or civil engineering anyway as a whole, sort of is sat in the sustainability field.
I feel like I've battled similar things in building. I think being a builder, it's definitely now getting better, and making good networks of other people who are doing the same things, and it's it's uplifting and keeps me going. But right at the beginning, just dealing with conventional builders who scoffed at just the idea of eco sort of natural materials.
Yeah.
It wasn't what they knew, so they wrote it off.
No, and people don't think that you can make a business out of it.
No.
Yeah, they just sort of laugh at your naivety about thinking that you could maybe make it work as a business. Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you have focused, and it sounds like you really had to be off your own back. Your drive to get that as what you wanted to do.
Yeah, and it was a good sort of probably sort of 4 or 5 years of going to. I spent a lot of time going to AECB events, Association of Environmentally Conscious Building. There's a good group of people in the sort of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Worcestershire kind of area. I went along to a lot of their visits that they did, and the conferences and all that kind of thing. And but it was a good sort of few years of doing that in my own time, off my own back, and it was infinitely useful because there's so many people in that world that have so much knowledge that it's really interesting to sort of talk to them about it. But it's definitely a concerted effort to get that going and make those contacts.
Do you feel like it's changing at all with the work you're doing with Bath and UE?
I don't know. I don't. It's difficult to compare it with people at university, because everyone at university, like I said, thinks they're going to come out and change the world, and it doesn't always work like that, sadly. And we need some more of that, but I think we've always needed more of that in people who work in the industry. That's partly why I do the tutoring, to keep that kind of excitement about what you're doing in projects and what you could do with projects, pushing the boundaries rather than just sort of whacking out the same old steel sizes every day. But it's I don't know. I think we need to get some of that excitement somehow, but I don't think that's a sort of new problem. I think that's just sort of the difference between when you're studying and then when you're trying to make a business out of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. It's tricky.
I wanted to very briefly just jump back to what you said about your dad. It's fascinating to hear that he was a eco builder. That must have been one of the real early adopters.
He was doing some interesting stuff, which I don't think I really appreciated fully as a child. But now looking back on it and having the same conversations with people nowadays, especially that kind of, can we make a business out of it? I'm like, my dad made a business out of this 30 years ago. I don't know why you think it's going to be a struggle now. But yeah, so he was one of the group who set up the AECB, the Association of Environmentally Conscious Builders, as it was originally, and then it became building more generally. So sort of, a few of them sort of, I think sort of Stroudish way where they first set it up, as most of these things come out of Stroud originally. So he doing things like rammed earth walls and straw bale building and a laser timber frame, all those kind of things. For I grew up in Cheltenham, so in the Cheltenham, Gloucestershire kind of area. So he's retired now mostly. He says he's still building his own extension, but he's supposed to be mostly retired. Doing that. So that's sort of what I grew up, which I guess, like I said, was kind of invaluable, really, seeing that you could run a business doing that people were interested. I think people are really easy to get cynical about, nobody will want it, so you can't find the people who are interested. Nobody will spend their money on this kind of thing. But that was really valuable to have that role model, I guess.
It puts you in a unique position to have seen it working and to know that it's not this new wishy-washy hippie thing. It's functional, it's practical.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think also just that kind of appreciation of builders and the skill that they bring as well, aside from sustainability, having that appreciation. I think sometimes in the professional sort of side of things, we can get quite snobbish about what we know compared to what builders know, but having that appreciation of builders who are thinking about things carefully and sensibly, and who have skills that are different to, like, my set of skills, different to most builders' set of skills, but it's still equally valuable in terms of the design and what you can bring to the project as a whole. That I valued as well.
Yes, there's a lot of talk of how the professionals all think that the builders are do poor quality work, and then the builders all think that the engineers and the architects are all out of touch and can't actually build anything. And it's a shame, because when everyone works together, great things can really happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because in reality, no, I couldn't build stuff as well as you can. Like, I don't build stuff on a regular basis. That's not how I'm learning about building. But it's valuable both ways. It's valuable learning about it in the practical sense. It's valuable learning about it in the sort of more theoretical sense, and then bringing those two sort of sides together to build to good projects and sensible projects and things that are going to last as well.
Yeah. I just spoke with Lucy from the Green Register this morning, director of the Green Register.
Oh, yeah.
I was noticing that you have just done a talk for them.
Yes. Just before lockdown, I think. Got that in quick at the start of March. So just mainly talking about, that was sort of entitled, what was it entitled for them? But it's, in my head, I think of it as structures for PassivHaus, and then I added other low energy buildings, and then also low carbon buildings as well. So the title got a bit rambling in the end by the time I'd finished with it. But and getting the best out of your engineer as well, because there's no way that I'm going to be doing all of the low energy PassivHaus projects in the country, and it shouldn't be that way either. But making helping other people to get the best out of the engineer that they have appointed. And it was a little bit about how engineers think, how we approach projects, and then a little bit about my experience of building mostly timber frame, PassivHaus and low energy projects.
Excellent. Was it well received?
I think so. I think I might have gone a little bit too into some engineering-y terms for architects. It's so difficult to separate out what is stuff that everybody knows and what is stuff that just people who are stuck in your little engineering world know. Mm-hmm. And all the acronyms that you get so used to saying, and then you realise that nobody else understands what you're talking about. So I think. And it's difficult because their sessions are sort of 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock. So just after people have been at work all day, just trying to find stuff to keep them entertained whilst they're sort of nodding off, having spent the whole day at work. I did a bit of model building to start with, making little structural models out of spaghetti and marshmallows. So I thought that would engage them as we got in from work.
That's a great starter to get people's brains engaged. I'm particularly intrigued by the getting the best out of your engineer element of that talk. I was wondering if you could give us a sneak peek without giving away too much, because obviously don't want to take away from the Green Register.
What was I talking about? So I think it was a little bit about what I was saying earlier, about just sort of going through where most engineers are coming from, having graduated and having done chartership, and what your sort of base level of understanding of sustainability issues will generally be. And then I did a whole thing about how we approach projects, which I think is maybe slightly different to how sort of other professionals and builders are approaching projects. So I started off with a sort of little talk about the buildings fall down. Basically, that's sort of generally the approach that was sort of how we start projects. How I think I start projects is basically, how will the structure fall down? That's how will it fail? What would be the issues of how it would fail? So just pictures of things failing. And I mean, it's a question I get a lot, or comment I get a lot. Do structures really fall down? Do buildings really fail? And you're like, well, yes, they do, because gravity works. So sort of like the wind blows, yes, and the wind is very strong. So I just went through a little bit of reminding people of where we're coming from as well, because I think for a lot of engineers, especially if you're working domestic size projects, you do new build staff and extensions and new structures, but you also sort of probably about 25% of our workload is surveying existing structures that are failing in various forms. Right. So that when that is more often part of your workload, I think you're sort of looking at defects and how things could go wrong a bit more. So I was just sort of trying to sort of highlight that that's where we're coming from, that things do go wrong, that structures do fail for various different reasons, and just sort of highlighting that as something to keep in mind when you're dealing with structural engineers. Basically,
that's good. I probably could have had that advice a little bit sooner. I've definitely had my head in my hands at times at just how over-engineered a thing seems to be. And I've maybe shaken my fist a little bit and gone, structural engineering. But is of course, it's a vital thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was getting that in some of my tutoring as well recently, where I was tutoring alongside an architecture tutor, and a lot of the projects are quite sort of speculative, and they're testing out new materials, and they was just sort of like, oh, we'll just test it out and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, then we'll just put it right. And I was like, yeah, but don't do that with the structure. If things don't quite work out with your structure, you could kill somebody. So test it out, find whatever with the insulation, with stuff that you could rectify without necessarily have killed somebody in order to get to that point. So it's that kind of, I think, especially if architects are tutoring a lot, they're sort of in that, oh, we'll just test it out and see. And particularly in the low energy sustainable building world, where things are quite sort of early on in the sort of research stages. Often it's like, oh, we'll just try it out and see, and yeah. I think I'm always a bit hesitant about that approach towards structures, particularly because people die. yeah. So I've definitely had people ask, what's the worst that can happen, and I'm like, well, death. That would be the worst. and it can happen. Yeah. So yeah, it's just having that appreciation that's where people are coming from. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to change an engineer's mind in their approach to something, that those are the kind of things that you're having to get over.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would weigh quite heavy on your conscience, wouldn't it? If you'd pandered to someone's crazy idea and then something went wrong.
Yeah. And I think and sort of related to that, I was talking about sort of how if you're going with something like that something is experimental, then coming with data, coming with something that's more than just, oh, we'll just try it out, or oh, it's been, oh, so and so has done this before, but coming with the sort of, this is the data that somebody has researched, this is the weight behind what you're saying. These are the number of projects that have been done. This is how long they've been standing, or they've been on site, or whatever. That kind of thing. Coming with,
I think, and this isn't a criticism of structural engineers. It's just a sort of acknowledgement of the world we live in. I think the having to deal with insurance, and I've often felt like a structural engineer probably comes up with a number and then has to multiply it by a factor. So you're talking about the thickness of a timber, the sort of fear factor of having to be insured, and that's the true dimension of timber you end up with, is this sort of multiplied number. I don't know if that's in any way true of the real situation, but it's as a builder, that's how it seems.
It's I mean, there's obviously factors in the design codes. You factor up the loads and you factor down the capacities of the material you're building with, and that's sort of how you come to a solution. I guess the sort of fear factor around timber, I think, comes a lot with, we're used to dealing with steel and concrete to some extent, where the material properties it's made in a factory to some extent, and you know the properties with certainty, and they are the same all the way through the material. Again, to some extent, but timber and masonry as well, because they're natural, sort of use quotes around that, but they're sort of come sort of more as they grow, or as they're found in the world. You have an element of uncertainty around what the material is actually going to behave like, because we have our design strength classes for timber, for example, and you've got a C16, a C24, and things get graded to those grades or whatever, but and you've got some kind of certainty in that, but there's always the risk that particular piece of a material might be wildly different to its neighbour because the tree grew differently. It came from, I don't know, maybe a different forest, or just on the different side of a forest, on the outside of a forest versus the inside of a forest, and that can change the properties so much. And you've got to have sort of certainty in a lot of processes in order to get to that point that people are grading appropriately and to the right standards, and whether they're doing it visually or using machine grades. And there's lots of uncertainties built into that compared to the steel and the concrete that you're used to, that is made in a factory or batched in a factory, or more steel rather than concrete. There's more uncertainty with concrete, but you've got that kind of more uncertainties inherent in the material because it's different and it's not factory made.
Right. And that increases the uncertainty factor. So you're getting scaled up a bit. And
then I guess if you're doing something experimental as well, if you're doing something outside of the design standards, the Eurocodes or the British standards that are established, that if you were to work to the standards, and even then, if something went wrong, if you were shown to have worked to the given standards, and there would be some kind of security in that in terms of your insurances. But if you're doing something that's more experimental and there's no standard, or there's no material data, you're having to make a judgment. There's more stuff where it becomes more opinion rather than sort of a sort of standard certainty. You've got more inherent risk in that, and I think that's where people get more worried about stuff.
You mentioned just briefly there grading of timbers, and I think some people might not be aware of what a C16 timber is, what a C24 timber is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially just sort of groups of properties. If you've got a C, and then that you can take that grade and you can put that grade into a table, and it will tell you all the different structural properties of that material that it mostly probably will meet if it's met that grading standard. And then I don't know, that might not make any sense at all. I don't know. But and then so essentially it's somebody will have looked at that bit of timber, and either they will have looked at it and on their experience and their training they will say that meets a certain standard, or they will have put it through a machine that will load it and then tell you whether it's meeting a certain standard. And it's sort of a pass-fail thing. Yeah, so I might need to explain that better. Let me know if you've got any questions.
I think that's good. I'm intrigued by the testing process. So it's largely visual grading, isn't it? That's done, is my understanding.
In the UK, yes, and in hardwoods, yes. Right. Larger producers of softwood like Canada and continental Europe have more machine grading, and Scotland to some extent they do machine grade some softwoods up in Scotland, but then the rest of England, Wales and hardwoods, especially UK grown again hardwoods, most of it's visually graded, which is essentially just somebody looking at a bit of timber, and I think it's not something I'm trained in, so this is just my perspective at the moment. It's something I'm hoping to get trained in, but essentially, from my understanding, it's particularly looking at the straightness of the timber, the straightness of the grain, and the number of knots in a particular piece of cut. It's once it's sawn, so once the timber is processed from the round log to sort of cut bits of timber that you would use in a structural perspective, and then somebody looking at that and saying, yes, that meets that standard, that meets maybe a slightly higher standard because it's a nicer bit of timber. Yeah.
So you could theoretically start with the same tree and cut it in two different ways, and you'd get two different gradings because of the grain direction.
Yeah. or the sort of quality and straightness of it, and
Interesting. And then when you're specifying timber, is it? I'm thinking about a specific example where we were told to we had to use a C24 100 by 100 post. We had to use quite a few of those, and they're not a very commonly used bit of timber, and they're very, very expensive because of it. When you're specifying timbers, how are you choosing what goes where? You're looking at the forces on the building and then choosing from a table. Is that right? Or am I over? I feel like I'm probably oversimplifying that.
Well, because timber doesn't come in it does come in set sizes, but in a way it doesn't, because you can saw it to any size you want. So it's unlike steel, which comes in as a range of set I-section sizes, and whilst you can get it fabricated in all sorts of different things, those are the set tables. We don't necessarily have access to tables that are common sizes of timber, which I think is part of the problem as well. So we are just generally. So I use a calculation software, TEDS it's called, and you put in your forces on your beam, and then it's got a drop down list of sizes, which are sort of standardized to some extent, but then you can also then manually change the sizes in that, and you can put in whichever dimension you fancy. So I think some of the thing comes from we're obviously coming from a different perspective on sort of sizing. We're just sizing usually based on what the easiest thing to pick up from the drop down table in the calculation software is, right. Or what you've particularly used before. But we're not buying the timber, so I know, but I don't have an appreciation necessarily of what the cheapest sizes are, because it might be that if you've got 100 by 100 post specified, a 97 by 97 post is actually what's more widely available, and maybe that's not going to make a huge amount of difference to the actual calculation, but it just happens to have been what numbers they put in, and generally engineers like to round to the nearest 5 millimeters anyway, so if it was close enough, but so there's some things in this is why I like the conversations with the builders, and why I like working on projects that have builders appointed rather than just sort of tendering for an unknown builder, because I can call up and go, well, what sizes can you get hold of, and I will calculate based on those things that you can get hold of. Similarly, even with things like the engineered wood projects, which do come in set tables of certain sizes that they manufacture, and on the internet it seems like you can get loads of sizes, because you look on the product manufacturer's website and there's every single size you could possibly want, and then you realize that that's what you can get on continental Europe, and they don't actually ship most of those sizes to the UK. So what you can get from this massive A4 size table is like 3 sizes, and we're not buying those things, so we don't know that necessarily as engineers. Well, I don't know that as engineers. Other engineers might be more aware of these things, but I don't look at that. And I really value that kind of feedback. Actually, no, I can't get hold of that timber. Can we change it? I'd rather have that conversation and change it to something that is cheaper to get hold of, because sometimes it can make massive difference to the cost. Just a sort of a 3 mil size difference that isn't going to change, or shouldn't really change your calculations. I'm not designing stuff that's necessarily that close to the bone, where 3 millimeters would make that much difference to the calculations most of the time. So I'd rather have that conversation and get the best for the client out of that.
And this is why I'm so pleased that I got your business card. music to my ears. So I'm intrigued to know what sort of decisions you can make, and what sort of your approach to sustainability is, and what sort of scope you have to really specify things which are going to be better.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of some things like that, just sort of sizing things sensibly and wider than just a sort of environmental sustainability point as well, sort of thinking about the economic sustainability. So thinking about that, one of the things I've been learning about recently on the sort of timber engineering side is about grading and learning about sort of how we grade in the UK grown timbers. Thinking about projects where they're interested in using UK grown timber or softwoods, because that tends to be what we use most in most house building, and how I was learning that because we visually grade in this country, there's a limit to the sizes that you can visually grade most species of softwoods too in the British standard for the visual grading. So so often they talk about this a lot in the sort of UK timber market. You can't often get UK timber up to a C24, which tends to be the sort of standard that most engineers will specify.
Yeah.
Partly, I think, because it's the default value in the calculation software, but maybe that's my cynical view of it. Maybe other people are putting slightly more thought into it. But I don't think in necessarily people. I hear a lot of things. Oh, it's really difficult to design in C16, and I think, well, I don't see how it would be that much different designing in C24. It's just that it's not the default. You'd have to make sure that you remembered to change the drop-down box every time you went in to do the calculations, but that's something that is possible to do, and you'd have to be able to allow for slightly deeper, wider sections because it's not as sort of strong. So it's those kind of things, just thinking about sort of those kind of tweaks to how you can specify that's timber, for example. So we're, as a company now, we're thinking about giving people the option. So if we could design a C24, this is the sizing option, but if you wanted a C16, it would be this. If you wanted to get the UK timber, you could do that. Just giving people options. And even on things that are seen as less green, like concrete, there's changes you can make to the specification of concrete, adding in cement alternatives to displace some of the proportion of Portland cement that you're putting in the mix that don't adversely change the structural properties, but would significantly reduce the carbon in the material. It's things like that, just giving people the option that they could do those kind of things to change things. And then there's obviously all the discussion about designing things really sort of close to not leaving any room for movement in the design, which is I don't know. I've always in terms of the sizing, sort of making sure that all of your elements are designed with optimum efficiency, which is it's something I hear a lot from university students. I don't know whether there's been something going around about that being a problem with engineers' designs. That there's a lot of room for error, margin for error in our designs, which I don't think is really true from seeing not just our designs but other engineers' designs. I don't think people are designing with miles of margin for error. I think most people are trying to design efficient structures, but it's difficult, especially in sort of, I don't know whether it's especially in our sort of domestic market, or it might be true of larger projects as well. But it's my experience, sort of the domestic scale, where sometimes you're relying on other people having measured up, maybe a domestic client having measured up, or them not quite being 100% sure about how wide they want an opening or something, or that they might change it slightly because, I don't know, they want to get a kitchen unit around something. I tend to design sort of spans with a sort of probably 100-ish mil margin of error in case the opening size changes a bit, and then I'm not necessarily designing it perfectly efficiently then, but it means that I'm also then not wasting the client's money by having to charge them for redesigns every time that they change the opening by 50 mil. So, and a lot of things in masonry buildings, especially the sort of small domestic stuff, the beam sizes are chosen on the width of the masonry unit anyway. You could probably get a smaller beam size to work, but the masonry wall is 100 mil wide, so you need a beam that is 100 mil wide to fit underneath it. So there's some sort of practicalities and actual buildability that mean that designing that kind of really squeaky efficiency margins doesn't necessarily work that well in practice. In my experience anyway.
You'd be sort of sacrificing potential cost of redesigns and your time. It's an interesting trade-off, isn't it, of trying to be use the smallest dimensions and be as most efficient, and then obviously if it's going to cost loads, then people can't do it anyway, so they won't.
And with engineers' fees, it's very quickly you can spend an extra beam design. The cost of us redesigning the beam, you could buy another beam for that cost usually. So you might as well just buy like you can pay me to redesign it for slightly closer to the bone section, or you can just buy the one that you've got size. And that'll be the same price.
You talked a little bit there about UK timber. I'm intrigued to sort of dig into that a little bit more. Actually, on our last Heartwind build, we always try to use local timber as much as possible. And the year before last in Scotland, that was absolutely not a problem. Lots and lots of trees in Scotland. And before that in Wales, again, really not an issue. But this last summer, we were building in Suffolk. And I was looking for a local sawmill that could grade the timber, and I asked absolutely everybody and got a general "no, what are you talking about?" response. And this was all UK grown timber that was generally being shipped across from somewhere in the west to Suffolk. And it just, as we were running out of time and it was getting closer and closer to the build, my probably biggest regret of that build is that we plumped for just getting some European timber, C24 European timber, thinking, it'll probably come from Scotland or Scandinavia or something like that. And it won't be so bad. And then it all turned up on a truck from where was it? Estonia, somewhere like that. Latvia, Estonia. And I just put my head in my hands, and then I went and worked out the carbon of actually shipping all of that all that way, and realised that we should have just actually got some from a UK mill in the UK that could have graded it and then transported it across the country rather than across the continent.
Yeah, I mean, knowing about the sourcing of timber, that's probably something that you come across more than I do, sort of in my day-to-day life. But yeah, it's interesting though, because if you're sort of thinking about the carbon and carbon offsetting as well, I've heard other people talk about the argument for. So a lot of those Eastern European countries are. Well, I don't know about a lot of them, but there's some of them that are over covered in forest, and we have a low forest covering. We're trying to increase our covering of sort of woodland and forest in the UK. So there's something about maybe using the trees from where they don't want trees, don't need trees, and keeping our UK timbers in the ground. I don't know. There's arguments for all sorts of different standpoints. But it was interesting talking to somebody about that recently, and I was thinking, I can see where they're coming from on that perspective.
Yes, as always, I don't think there's ever a truly correct answer. You just have to balance. All the different factors and
your own priorities. I think. Yeah. And things will change, won't they? So say that to people a lot, is sort of just like, oh well, what do we do? Which installation do we choose? Which heating system do we choose? Well, that kind of thing. And I think you've just got to make the best decision you can at the time. Like in my house, I've done internal wall insulation, and when we moved in, there was no heating system, so we put a gas boiler in. This was 4 or 5 years ago now. If I were doing it now, I would probably look at a heat pump, but that was the best option at the time. 4 or 5 years ago, the carbon intensity of the electricity grid was very different to what it is now, and gas was a better option. But yeah, you've just got to do something, haven't you, and make the best of the options you've got at the time.
Very much so. So I wanted to come back to your Twitter bio again and talk. You're passionate about diversity in construction. Do you want to explain a little about that?
Yeah. So most people, when they think about diversity in whatever industry it is, a lot of what we talk about at the moment is women in construction or women in STEM subjects, and that tends to be people's sort of understanding of diversity, that we'll just get more women into the industries, and that'll be that. But I'm definitely interested in sort of the wider diversity than just women in engineering or women in construction, looking at sort of racial diversity, gender diversity, disability diversity, all sorts of those kind of things. That's what I'm passionate about, I think. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of ideas of how we could do better to increase that diversity?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, thinking that you'd probably ask me about that. I think so. The company that I work at the moment, Build Collective, it's a great bunch of people, and I've been there 5 years now, and it's been a really great company to be in and to explore these kind of things in, because we all work part-time to various different hours. I mean, we're sort of all mostly, my director, she probably doesn't work part-time most of the time, but she theoretically she does. But it just it's sort of looking at that way and giving people that option. And it's been nice to have that option of working part-time so early on in my career, because you sort of come to, I think, it's thinking that, if I work for however many years, then I'll have the option of asking to go part-time, or if I have children, then I'll have the option of asking to go part-time, or sort of thinking about those kind of things. But it's been nice to have that option, so early on in my career, and it's been really great for me. I work 4 days a week, so having that extra day has been great, So that's
a really simple thing, isn't it? It's to make a massive difference to a wide variety of people just in part time. It's such a simple solution.
Yeah, because it works well. A lot of people who are looking after children, and it particularly works well for encouraging women in an industry, I'm disabled as well, so I have a pain condition and I'm autistic. So having that extra day for me, for sort of recovery from the sort of usual work week, is essential for me being able to work long term. Because that was how I came into sort of thinking about working part time. Is I'd worked full time for sort of maybe 18 months at a maximum. And then I'd burnt out and had to have time off, and I was then sort of coming back to it, thinking I need to find a solution that will work for me, that is sustainable for me in the long term. And I've tweaked around with my hours since going part time, and I've found a good position for me that means that I can sustain a sort of normal year pattern of having the sort of normal 4 weeks holiday, and keep that going for 5 years now, which is the longest I've ever had a job. So without having to need sort of a month or so off to recuperate. But so having that option to be able to try those things out, and for it not to be something that is a perk of having worked there a certain amount of time or having a certain level of seniority. It just means, because it's about keeping staff as well, people wanting to work with us and for us. And it just makes a better working environment, I think.
Do you have a sense of what kind of percentage of engineers are actually female?
I did know these things, but I can't remember. It was something around 10 to 14-ish%, I think. They've done a survey recently, the Royal Academy of Engineering, a diversity in engineering survey, which was basically a women in engineering survey with a little bit of racial diversity checked on the end. So they've looked at the different sectors within the engineering banner. Sort of the construction industry, civil engineering wasn't too bad in compared to some of them, but it wasn't I think mechanical engineering was the best, maybe. But there's a good document on the Royal Academy of Engineering website about that, which is really, really interesting, and talks about it's got loads of examples of good practice in companies and how to encourage diversity. One of which being working part-time. And people, I think, especially in the construction industry, or whether especially in the construction industry, in the construction industry, people are like, "Oh, how do you manage to work part time? Don't you get people sort of wanting you to work all of the time? And how do you keep your days off?" And I'm like, "Well, if people call me, I can make the choice whether to answer. Most people have my mobile phone, which is my personal mobile as well. But so I generally can know if it's a work call." And then I can make the decision whether to answer it or not. But then at least if people know, I have on my email signatures now when my days off are. So then if people call on my day off, they're generally very apologetic about it, which is always nice. And I know that I've made that choice to answer, or I don't if I need a particular day off, and I just tell people that I can't come on that day.
Yeah.
And if they're desperate, I can send one of my colleagues, because we split our work week so that we cover all days between us, but we're not necessarily all there on all of the days. So you just tell people no. I generally think if people have planned their project well, they won't need you to be dropping everything at a moment's notice. So I'm probably not particularly sympathetic to people who are desperately needing everything yesterday. But okay.
I've definitely been guilty of that occasionally.
Sometimes things go wrong, and it depends on how people approach it as well. You're more inclined to drop things for people who've been nicer to you for the rest of the project.
That's another tip for getting the best out of your engineer.
Or knowing whether you want to work with me or not.
Is there anything else you wanted to say in terms of sort of diversity?
I do think it's about making a choice to do that as well, and it does have to be, I think, a sort of a conscious effort to encourage diversity in your company or whatever in the teams that you're working in. It isn't going to happen just by making part-time an option, and just by whatever. It will help, but it won't. It won't. It isn't the panacea. It's just, you have to make a conscious effort to hire people from minority backgrounds, and knowing that is beneficial to your company as well. I think having people from different backgrounds, it's not just a sort of nice thing to put on your website or whatever. It is valuable, and it does enhance from our perspective, it enhances our designs, our approach to designs, our approach to clients, our approach to projects in general. It makes the company better having a diverse workforce, and that's, I think, you've got to see it. And I think some people it's difficult for being from a minority sort of perspective as well. People get funny about you, about only being chosen, like if you're only being chosen for an event because they needed to get their diversity quota up.
Yes.
I don't know. People, you sort of feel hesitant about that because, yeah, but I think I tend to think about it in terms of sort of white middle class men will have got, from general perspective, particularly in the construction industry, will have got there also because they are white middle class men. It's not just because they're good at their job that they've been chosen for something. It is because they fit the mould of what's expected from a So I don't really mind being chosen to get the diversity up because I don't know. It's also got to start somewhere. So
definitely,
if I'm that person, then I'm that person, and if it means somebody else can actually get chosen because they have been recognised for being good at their job, then that's fine as well.
So I've got one final thing that I wanted to just the phrase efficient, humble design really made me smile. I wanted to just to find out. I wonder if what I feel is humble design is what you do as well. So yeah, I'm intrigued to sort of see what you were thinking about that.
Yeah, I think my interest is not particularly in sort of PassivHaus or the low energy world. Is not for the one-off bespoke grand designs type houses. Whilst they're interesting from a sort of an intellectual point of view, and the challenges they pose are interesting, I'm more interested in making these things simple and cost effective so that they're available to everyone, to people who don't think that they can afford sort of a sustainable house or a low energy house or a low carbon house, making things simple so that those things are available to more than just the people with the money to afford to be the sort of the sort of leaders in the and they have their value, those kind of projects, because somebody needs to be able to sort of fund those kind of innovative projects to get these things started. But I think we're sort of past that now with the sustainability sort of low energy, low carbon world. We're into the point where we have enough knowledge behind and projects behind us to be able to learn from in order to start optimizing designs and so that things can become more cost efficient for other people. I'm particularly interested in social housing and making PassivHaus and super low energy comfort standards available to help fuel poverty and people who can't afford to buy their own homes, making it available to them.
Yeah, it's
That's
one of the
interest.
great injustices, isn't it, that the very affluent people can afford to get their cheap to run house, while the people that can't afford to run their house, they're on the really inefficient, money wasting sort of end of the housing market. Yeah,
definitely. So it's part of what I did with my house that I do own, but it's an ex-council house, and some of the sort of similar houses are still under social housing ownership. So I wanted to do something for this house type, which is quite common across our area, so that it could be sort of cost effective and sort of simple, and something that could be rolled out for social housing providers, and sort of give a model for that, and also do a bit of learning on what we've done so that they don't have to do that. Yeah.
Great. And how's that gone?
It's going slowly because we're doing it in stages. So we've done the internal wall insulation, got a central heating system put in. We've only got 2 radiators though, so one upstairs, one downstairs.
Right.
which the plumber was very sad about doing. He was convinced we're going to freeze. He only lives just down the road, but he's convinced we're going to freeze in the winter. So I chose the radiator downstairs because it looks pretty. Basically, I've got one of the sort of the high aesthetic ones that doesn't give out much heat. Right. And then I let him choose the radiator for upstairs. And he's like chosen the biggest one he could possibly find to fit in the space. And it's like tropical upstairs most of the time.
Bless, he was worried about you.
He was. Yeah. So it's like because I did an energy model on the house before doing it and worked out what sort of energy requirements we need for the radiators. And that radiator in itself, once we've done all of the retrofit measures, will be enough to like do the heating load 3 times over, I think. But, it keeps the plumber happy. Yeah. So there we go. So we've done internal wall insulation because we live in the Bath area, so covering Bath stone is a big no-no. So we've had to do internal wall insulation and done a bit of loft insulation and efficient heating system and insulated the ground floor, which it was a concrete slab, so internally insulated that. And then so the next things are to do something with the roof, which I'm not sure what we're going to do yet. So whilst we were doing the internal wall insulation and the slab, we've done an airtightness barrier. But now it's what to do with the loft and the cold roof. So at the moment I'm looking at maybe replacing the whole thing and doing a sort of cathedral ceiling. But partly because I can't be bothered to airtightness tape around all of the ceiling joists. And the felt does need replacing anyway, so it does need re-roofing anyway. The structure's fine, but so I'm like, well, maybe it'll, getting some costs for that at the moment. And then a ventilation system alongside that, looking at MPHR. So it's going, and then the windows and doors as well. They're currently double glazed UPVC, so replacing them with triple glazed timber windows we would do. But so it's going in stages. But it's good at the moment. Yeah, bit of mould around the windows because we've now got a thermal bridge.
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah, solve one problem, create another.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How do you feel on the Windows front at the Green Register Hot Topic event? Someone was saying, I forget whose talk it was, they were saying about how adding the extra pane of glass to make triple glazing, the amount of energy in making the glass would never be paid back.
Oh gosh, yeah. Okay.
The window. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I mean, there's all those kind of energy and carbon calculations that honestly is not my area of expertise, and other people can do the numbers. But I think I don't know. There's so many things to go into that, and I think one of the reasons, from a PassivHaus perspective, one of the main reasons for having triple glazed is for the surface temperatures, so that you don't get radiant cooling from the windows, rather than it doesn't massively impact the U value. Obviously, it does impact the U value, but not massively. There's so many arguments into this, and you can get into so much detail. And then I think it can also, like I was saying earlier, it can stall you from making any decisions if you're stuck between what is the exact right thing to do. But sometimes it's just about doing something and then learning from it and making that knowledge also available so that other people can learn from it, which is good for some of the house databases that are available, like the PassivHaus Trust have a database, and also the low energy building database as well through the AECB, sort of making that knowledge available so that other people can learn from it as well.
Thank you so much to Beth. That was a wonderful conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. Hopefully you all did at home. It was definitely on the geekier end, maybe the more in-depth. I imagine some of you might have tuned out if it was too much, but hopefully you're still with us now. I just wanted to say that there'll be all the links will be in the show notes to AECB, Build Collective, PassivHaus database, low energy building database. I'll also put a link to Beth's Twitter feed, which is a really great resource. I've enjoyed reading a lot of the links she's put there, especially the stuff about diversity. As always, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, hit subscribe on whatever device you listen to this on, and check back through the previous episodes. There's a whole load more on construction, sustainability, craft. So I hope you're staying safe and staying well. There'll be another episode coming directly after this. See you soon. Bye-bye. There's a bloody dog barking in the background.